In today's video, I'm going to give a brief overview of World War I from the U.S. perspective. World War I was originally known as the Great War. It was only after World War II that the Great War became known as World War I. Some also call World War I the war to end all wars. World War I lasted a little over 4 years, saw 70 million soldiers in action from 135 different countries, caused around 40 million casualties with 20 million deaths. There were four main causes of World War I. The first is militarism. The nations of Europe were in an arms race. The money spent on these militaries needed to be justified. The second cause is alliances. The nations of Europe aligned themselves with other nations to discourage war. The third cause is imperialism. Countries spread their power and wealth by adding additional territories to their control. With imperialism came nationalism. Many nations wanted their independence from the other European powers. Let's take a closer look at the alliances. There were two main alliances before World War I started. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy were part of the Triple Alliance. Britain, France, and Russia were part of an alliance called the Triple Entente. Other smaller nations had separate alliances with these six powers. These alliances were meant to keep the peace because nations were less likely to go to war because it would pull other nations into the war. If any nation attacked England, then Russia, France, and all the other nations allied with those nations would come to England's aid. But all it would take is a small spark and it would set off the alliance powder keg. The Balkan region would provide that small spark with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. On June 28, 1914, Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austrian crown, was on a tour in Sarajevo, Bosnia. While in a parade, he would be assassinated by a Serbian nationalist. Let's look at the alliances in action. On July 28, 1914, World War I began when Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Germany, an ally of Austria-Hungary, then declares war on Russia, an ally of Serbia. France enters the war as an ally of Russia. Germany then invades Belgium, and Britain enters as a Belgian ally. Soon the nations would be divided into two camps. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, would fight the Allied powers of France, Russia, the United Kingdom, several other nations, and in 1917, the United States would join the Allied powers. Germany would find itself with enemies on both sides and forced to fight a two-front war. On Germany's Western Front, it would fight France and England. On Germany's Eastern Front, it would fight Russia. We will focus on the Western Front. Germany blows through Belgium and makes its way towards Paris. The French army would make its stand about 15 miles outside of Paris at the Marne River. The German offensive was stopped in what is called the First Battle of the Marne, or the Miracle on the Marne. For the rest of 1914, the German and French armies would fight a series of battles where each tried to outflank the other. These battles became known as the Race to the Sea. By the end of 1914, the Western Front had become thousands of miles of trenches, as both the German and the French armies used trench warfare. This type of warfare provides a horrible environment for soldiers, as they had to live, eat, sleep, and fight in these large ditches. The soldiers would wait to go over the wall and enter the area between the trenches called no man's land. Neither side could gain an advantage, and the Western Front became a stalemate. Both sides tried many new weapons and technologies to break the Western Front stalemate. Just 1 decade earlier, the Wright brothers had made their first historic flight, and now planes would be used in war. Pilots, called aces, would fight air battles known as dogfights to gain control of the skies. Transportation advanced from horses, bikes, and motorcycles to the first tanks. Giant heavy artillery would be used by both sides, including Germany's Big Bertha guns. Flamethrowers became a common weapon. The most terrible new weapon used in World War I was the chemical weapons. Gases that include tear, chlorine, and mustard were used to try to clear enemy positions. These gases would kill by blistering lungs and throats, causing internal bleeding, blindness, blistering skin, and caused debilitating injuries that lasted the rest of the soldiers' lives. We will look at 2 major battles on the Western Front. The first of these battles is the Battle of Verdun. This is a German offensive where the German focuses on areas around the city of Verdun. After 6 months of fighting, the Germans only gained 4 miles at the cost of over 1.2 million casualties from both sides. The second battle is the Battle of the Somme. The Somme is a British offensive. For 7 days, the British bombarded the Germans with heavy artillery in the area around the Somme River. On the first day, 19,000 British died, making it the bloodiest day in British military history. It was in this battle that we will see our first tanks. The Somme offensive will cause over 1 million casualties. With these 2 battles, we have over 2 million casualties and prove that the Western Front would remain a stalemate. Everything changed in 1917. While Russia was fighting Germany on the Eastern Front, they were also staging their own revolution within their country. And in 1917, communists led by Lenin take over Russia, and Lenin pulls Russia out of the war, allowing Germany to focus on the Western Front. Also in 1917, the United States enters World War I. On April 6, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson and Congress declared war on Germany. There are several reasons the United States entered World War I. One, the United States was linked historically and financially with France and Great Britain. In 1917, Arthur Zimmermann, a German foreign minister, sent a telegram to Mexico. In this telegram, Germany promised to help Mexico recover territory that it had lost to the United States in 1840, areas that included Texas, New Mexico, California, and Arizona. In return, Mexico would declare war on the United States, and this would keep the United States occupied in North America. The telegram was intercepted by the British and given to the United States. The main reason the United States entered World War I was German unrestricted submarine warfare. The Germans had set up a zone around Europe. The German U-boats would attack any ship that entered this zone. On May 7, 1915, the British luxury liner Lusitania was destroyed by a German U-boat, killing almost 1,200 people, including 128 Americans. To keep the U.S. out of World War I, the Germans made the Suez Pledge, promising to only destroy civilian ships after giving a warning and allowing civilians to leave the ship. This promise kept the United States out of World War I, but in 1917, the Germans started back up restricted submarine warfare, and the U.S. would mobilize for war. The U.S. sent 4.7 million fresh troops to the Allied cause. These American troops became known as the American Expeditionary Force and would be led by General Blackjack Pershing. Over 1 million of these U.S. troops would fight in the last Allied offensive at the Meuse-Argonne Forest, under the command of French General Ferdinand Foch, the supreme commander of Allied forces. As defeat seemed inevitable, the German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, abdicated the throne and a new German government called for peace. At 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, World War I ended. November 11th, 1918 is called Armistice Day. Today, we celebrate Veterans Day on November 11th to commemorate the end of World War I. Now, let's look at some of the key figures of World War I. Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, and his assassination at the hands of Princeps was the event that started World War I. Wilhelm II was the Kaiser or King of Germany. His armies were led by German generals Erich Ludendorff and Paul von Hindenburg. The Allies were led by Supreme Commander Ferdinand Foch. The American Expeditionary Force was commanded by Blackjack Pershing. One of the most famous and highly decorated U.S. soldiers of World War I was Sergeant Alvin York. The most decorated U.S. pilot of World War I was Eddie Rickenbacker. His counterpart, the most famous German ace, was the Red Baron. The Tsar of Russia during World War I was Nicholas II. Nicholas and his family were killed during the Russian Revolution. Russian power then went to the communist dictator Lenin, who pulled Russia out of World War I in 1917. British officer T.E. Lawrence led British and Arabian troops against the Ottoman Empire. He became known as Lawrence of Arabia. The President of the United States was Woodrow Wilson. He was joined by British Prime Minister Lloyd George and French Prime Minister Clemenceau at the Conference of Versailles. It was at this conference, under the leadership of Wilson, that the Treaty of Versailles officially ended World War I. World War I ravaged Europe. Millions were dead, and great empires fell. But this would not prove to be the war to end all wars, as a larger and bloodier war would be waged in less than 25 years.